The city of Chicago has never been this quiet, at least not around the Memorial Plaza area. All roads leading to the center have been blocked off since early morning. Star-spangled flags fluttered along both sides of Michigan Avenue, but the air lacked the usual boisterous festival atmosphere. Today was a different day, a day of reverence. Marcus adjusted his tie, the collar of his uniform. Shirt constricted his throat, making breathing slightly difficult. He looked down at his companion. "You okay, old man?" Rex, the magnificent German shepherd, sat perfectly still by Marcus's left leg. At 12 years old, Rex's once pitch-black coat had turned salt and pepper, especially around his muzzle and eye sockets. But his posture remained straight as a bronze statue. Rex looked up, giving a slight tail wag. Just one, enough for Marcus to know he was listening. "Today's the last day. After this parade, you'll be lying on the sofa watching TV all day. No more gunfire. No more explosives." Marcus bent down, his hand stroking Rex's rugged spine. He could feel the bumpy scars beneath the thick fur, the vestiges of Fallujah, Kandahar, and the worst places mankind had ever set foot. Rex wasn't just a working dog. To Marcus, and to the entire division, Rex was a witness to history. A young soldier carrying a crate of bottled water stopped nearby. "Captain, is this Rex the Ghost?" Marcus nodded, unable to hide the pride in his eyes. "That's him. Careful, he doesn't like strangers staring." The young soldier swallowed, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and fear. "I heard he single-handedly dragged 3 wounded soldiers out of a collapsed bunker in Syria. My dad says he's a legend. Even legends get tired private. He's old." Marcus patted the soldier's shoulder and signaled Rex to stand up. The loudspeakers crackled momentarily before the commanding voice of the ceremony official boomed, announcing the start of the parade movement. The drums began to roll. Boom, boom, boom. The deep, resonant rhythm pounded against the chests of thousands standing along the streets. Marcus took a deep breath, clutching the worn leather leash, his and Rex's inseparable object for the past 5 years. "Let's go, Rex. Show them how a soldier walks." Rex stepped out. His strides no longer possessed the youthful grace, but carried the weight of experience. Each time his paws hit the asphalt, it created a strange solemnity. The crowds on both sides of the street fell silent as the K-9 unit passed. Children were hoisted onto their parents' shoulders, and old veterans offered military salutes. Everything was going perfectly until they passed the old post office area. The wind from Lake Michigan whipped through, carrying a bone-chilling cold and a mixed assortment of city odors: toasted bread, gasoline, cheap perfume, and a heavy smell of human presence. To Marcus, it was just wind. But to Rex, it was intelligence news. Marcus felt the leash in his hand tighten slightly. He glanced down. Rex was no longer looking straight ahead. His wet nose was twitching continuously, drawing in short, rapid breaths. His ears, which had been relaxed and drooped, suddenly stood erect, swiveling towards the shaded corner of the post office building. "Focus, Rex. Hail!" Marcus gave a light tug on the leash. Normally, a slight tug like that would instantly snap Rex back into absolute obedience. But this time, the dog seemed to have turned to stone. He stopped completely. The entire formation behind him nearly crashed into them. "What's wrong, Captain?" a nearby officer whispered. "I don't know. He's never done this." Marcus followed Rex's gaze. There, in the dim shadows under the awning of the old building, a group of homeless people huddled. They were not allowed near the VIP area, so the police had pushed them there. Ragged clothes, shopping carts piled high with scrap metal. A dark picture right next to the event's glamour. Suddenly, a low growl rumbled deep in Rex's throat. The sound was unlike a normal warning bark. It sounded like a truck engine starting up, a deep, chest-shaking vibration. The fur on Rex's scruff stood up like a row of sharp spikes. "Rex, seat." Immediately, Marcus snapped, cold sweat starting to break out on the back of his neck. He knew this look. He had seen it once in Afghanistan, right before Rex charged to tear apart a suicide bomber. But there was no enemy here, only civilians. Rex did not sit. He lowered his center of gravity, his forepaws gripping the road surface. The muscles rippled taut beneath his aging skin. For a fleeting second, Marcus saw something in Rex's eyes. Not pure aggression. It was desperation. A wild, agonizing longing. Snap! The dry sound rang out amidst the marching band music. The leather leash, which had kept Rex beside Marcus through countless campaigns, suddenly broke right at the metal clasp. The dog's lunge was too great, too sudden. Marcus lost his balance, stumbling forward. "Rex! Stop!" Marcus's shout was swallowed by the crowd's sudden cries of terror. The German shepherd bolted like a black arrow shot from a crossbow. He didn't run zigzag. He ran in a dead straight line, through the police barricades, leaping over the metal median strip. His target was the man standing in the dark corner. It was an elderly man, so frail that his oversized clothes seemed to hang on a bony coat rack. He was leaning against the pillar, holding a half-eaten loaf of bread. When he saw the four-legged beast charging towards him, he dropped the bread fragment, his eyes wide with terror. "No, help me!" The old man screamed, turning to run. But how could those old legs outmatch the speed of a canine legend? Rex lunged. His nearly 50-kilogram body slammed hard into the old man's back. Both tumbled onto the cold concrete ground with a crash. The impact was so loud that Marcus, who was sprinting desperately behind them, shuddered. "Save him! Shoot the dog!" A woman in the crowd shrieked. "Get back! Everyone back!" Marcus yelled, his hand instinctively drawing his sidearm. The scene before him was chaotic and terrifying. The old man lay flat on his back, hands raised to shield his face in vain. Rex was standing over his chest, his front paws pinned, the man's shoulders to the ground, preventing him from moving. Rex's muzzle was inches from the old man's throat. Just one bite, and the carotid artery would be ripped open. The presidential security detail swarmed in. 5 black muzzles were aimed squarely at Rex's head. "Captain, call your dog off now. I'm counting to 3. The security commander bellowed, his finger already on the trigger. Marcus lunged, sliding across the pavement to shield his dog from the guns. "Don't shoot. I'll handle it. Don't shoot." Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. His career, his unit's honor, and most importantly, the life of his friend, all hung by a thread. Why? Why was Rex going mad on this last day? Why attack a harmless homeless man? Marcus turned, aiming his pistol at Rex's head, the barrel trembling. He swallowed, his throat dry as a desert. "Rex, release him." His voice cracked. He never thought he would have to point a gun at the partner who had saved his life. But Rex didn't move, nor did he bite. The air around them seemed to freeze. The parade music had stopped. Only the whistling wind and the frantic breathing of hundreds of people remained. Marcus stepped closer, one step at a time, cautious as if crossing a minefield. He needed to see the situation clearly. If Rex had bitten, there would be blood. But there was no blood. When Marcus got close enough to see Rex's face, he froze. The gun in his hand slowly lowered. Rex was baring his teeth. His yellowed, worn fangs were pressed close to the old man's wrinkled, dirty neck skin, a posture of lethal threat. But his eyes, the fierce, amber eyes that enemies feared, were now filled with water. Large, round tears rolled down the corners of his eyes, streaming over the graying fur on his cheeks, falling onto the face of the man beneath him. Rex's body was shaking violently, not from rage, but as if restraining a heart-wrenching pain. From deep within his chest came soft, muffled whimpers, sounding like the cry of an abandoned child who had just found its mother. Was he growling at the world to protect this man, or was he weeping for something only he understood? The homeless man, after the initial moment of pure terror, now lay motionless. He slowly lowered the hands covering his face. His old eyes, clouded by the grime of life, stared intently at the beast weighing down on him. He didn't scream anymore. He was also shaking, but a different kind of tremor. "You!" The old man whispered, his voice hoarse, weak as the sound of dry leaves crumbling. His dirty, calloused hand, instead of pushing the dog away, slowly, tentatively reached up. His rough fingers touched the tear-soaked fur on Rex's cheek. "Is that—" The instant his finger made contact, Rex squeezed his eyes shut. He threw his head back and let out a long, mournful howl, a sorrowful, desolate cry that echoed across the silent plaza, piercing through thick coats, piercing through the hardest hearts. It was not the howl of a predator. It was the cry of a soul that had waited too long. Marcus stood stunned, his gun slipping from his grasp with a clatter onto the ground. He looked at the homeless man, then at Rex. A cold premonition ran down his spine. In the tattered breast pocket of the old man's coat, with his shallow, rapid breaths, something metallic glinted, catching the faint sunlight. A military dog tag. Rusted. Old. And Marcus knew this story did not begin with madness. It began with a yearning that had conquered death itself. "Get back. Everyone back." Marcus yelled again, his voice strained with tension. He kicked the fallen gun away and knelt beside Rex. His hand went to the dog's neck, ready for the strongest chokehold to pull him off if necessary. But as he touched the rigid muscle beneath the thick fur, Marcus paused. There was no struggle, no resistance. Rex's body was vibrating in a strange rhythm. He wasn't pinning to kill. He was rocking. Marcus leaned closer, his eyes widening in astonishment. Rex's front paws were not clamping down on the man's shoulders to prevent resistance. They were placed neatly together on the old man's sternum, applying pressure in steady, rhythmic pushes. Thump, thump, thump. "Oh God," Marcus whispered, a chill running down his back. The homeless man beneath was no longer moving. His eyes were rolled back, his mouth foaming, and his chest was convulsing violently like a broken machine about to explode. "Is there a doctor here? Hurry!" Marcus roared, turning back to the stunned crowd. A man in combat uniform, carrying an orange medical kit, rushed past the police barrier. It was Major Williams, the division's chief military physician. "Let me see." Williams tossed the bag down and knelt beside Marcus. He reached out to push the dog away, but Marcus held his arm. "Don't, Major. Look closely." Williams squinted. He looked at Rex's posture. The dog's large head was resting close to the man's cheek, keeping his head tilted to prevent choking on saliva, and his front paws were still diligently pressing down on the patient's chest, methodically and chillingly accurately. Is he giving CPR?" Williams gasped, his voice filled with the skepticism of a scientist. "Witnessing a miracle, not standard medical CPR," Marcus said, sweat soaking his forehead despite the cold. "But he's applying pressure to the chest. He's trying to maintain a heartbeat. He's performing the protective cocoon." Williams didn't hesitate. He pulled out his stethoscope, applying it to the old man's left chest, right beside Rex's claws. A rhythmic heartbeat. Ventricular fibrillation. He's having an acute myocardial infarction. If the dog hadn't kept him still and applied pressure like this, the convulsions would have made him bite his tongue or crack his skull on the ground. "Good job, Rex. Hold steady," Marcus whispered into the dog's ear, his tone shifting from command to reassurance. "The doctor is here. You did great." Rex let out a soft whimper, but he didn't leave his position. He merely looked up at Marcus, his eyes still moist, then at Williams, as if pleading, "Save him. Please." Williams injected a shot of adrenaline directly into the old man's wrist vein. "We need an ambulance immediately. Bring the defibrillator." While Williams wrestled with death to reclaim the man's breath, Marcus noticed the old man's left hand. The frail, dirt-blackened hand, which had been clutching something to his chest, now slowly loosened as the seizure passed. The fingers stretched out, dropping onto the cold ground, and the glittering metallic object slid out of his palm, lying exposed on the gray asphalt. Marcus picked it up. It was an old-style military dog tag from the early years of the War on Terror. It was worn at the edges, coated in sweat and dirt, indicating its owner had fiddled with it thousands of times. Marcus used his thumb to wipe away the dust on the embossed lettering. The first line appeared, "SGD Miller, David." The second line, U.S. Army. The third line, K9 Unit, 1st Division Marcus's entire world seemed to crumble. The blare of the ambulance siren, Major Williams's instructions, the crowd's murmurs, all became meaningless buzzes. David Miller. Marcus turned to look at Rex. The old dog was still lying there, refusing to leave the man's side, even as medical personnel tried to maneuver the stretcher in. David. Marcus whispered the name, and memories rushed back like a flood, sweeping him 8 years back to the Karengal Valley, thick with red dust and the smell of gunpowder. 8 years ago, Marcus was just a rookie, and David Miller was a legend. David and Rex were the invincible pair. They led every patrol, detecting every IED, sniffing out every ambush. Marcus remembered that fateful afternoon vividly. The Afghanistan sky was thick yellow, heavy with dust. Their unit received intelligence about a village occupied by insurgents. The mission was to rescue hostages and withdraw. But it was a trap. The moment they entered the central market, gunfire rained down from 4 sides. Mortars, RPGs, sharp rounds. The ground shook violently. Withdraw. Pull back to the rally point. The commander's voice screamed over the radio. The team retreated, returning fire while seeking cover. But through the choking dust of a building that had just been hit by a mortar, David saw a shadow. Civilians. Someone's trapped. David yelled, pointing toward the rubble of an old bakery. Don't, David. Too dangerous. The building's about to collapse completely. Marcus, who was taking cover behind a broken brick wall, shouted in protest. But David didn't listen. He slapped Rex's flank. Let's go, old friend. Find them. The silhouettes of the soldier and the dog rushed into the blinding dust. Seconds later, a huge explosion rang out. The concrete ceiling collapsed, burying everything. Marcus and his comrades frantically dug for 2 hours under fire, but in vain. An urgent withdrawal order was given. They were forced to leave, leaving their comrade under the cold concrete. 3 days later, when the army retook the area, the rescue team returned. They hoped to find a body to bring home. But they found a miracle, or rather, a tragedy, in a small hollow formed by 2 large slabs of concrete leaning against each other. David Miller lay. He was dead. A steel bar had pierced his abdomen. But his posture, he was lying face down, using his body to shield a local man curled up beneath him. And Rex, the dog, was still alive. He was emaciated, his fur matted with blood and dust, curled up right next to David's head and the strange man. When the rescue team approached, Rex growled fiercely, refusing to let anyone touch his cocoon. It took 4 soldiers to sedate him before they could pull him out. The local man was alive, but suffered a severe brain injury, memory loss, and extreme panic. After receiving first aid, he vanished from the refugee camp one rainy night, leaving no trace. No one knew who he was or his name. Only Rex had changed. From a cheerful dog, he became silent. Every night, he would sit looking towards the barracks gate, waiting for a figure that never returned. Marcus looked down at the dog tag in his hand. David had taken it off. Why? A soldier never removes his dog tags, unless... Marcus closed his eyes, picturing the scene in that dark, cramped hollow. David knew he wouldn't make it. He knew he was bleeding to death. Beside him was a man trembling with fear and cold. And Rex was looking at him. David had removed his dog tag, pressing it into the stranger's hand. Perhaps it was the only thing he could give at that moment. A token? Or a message? And then Marcus remembered the rescue team's account from that year. When they found the body, David's hand wasn't limp. His hand was resting on Rex's head. It was an order, a final command. Keep him. Don't let him die. Marcus's eyes flew open. He looked at the homeless man being loaded onto the stretcher by the medics. He was the local man from all those years ago. The man David had traded his life to protect. The man Rex had used his warmth to shelter for 3 long, cold nights. Rex hadn't attacked him. Rex had recognized his scent. The smell of David's blood mixed with this man's fear in that dark hollow, a scent that had never faded in the dog's memory over 8 years. To Rex, this old man was not a stranger. He was the unfinished mission. He was David's only surviving legacy. Captain, we're taking him now. Dr. Williams's voice pulled Marcus back to reality. Rex scrambled to his feet. He tried to follow the stretcher, but his hind legs buckled. He was too old, and the collision just now, combined with the intense emotion, had drained his strength. He lay flat on the asphalt, panting, his eyes still fixed on the closing doors of the ambulance. Marcus crawled over to Rex. He wrapped his arms around the dog's large neck, burying his face in the sweat-soaked fur. His tears flowed hot and sharp. "I'm sorry, Rex. I'm sorry I pointed my gun at you." Rex licked Marcus's cheek gently, then whimpered again, his head directed towards the siren, wailing as the vehicle sped away. "I get it," Marcus choked out. "You didn't abandon him. You never abandoned him. All these 8 years, you've been searching, haven't you?" Rex nudged his head against Marcus's chest, letting out a long, deep sigh. His tail, for the first time this morning, thumped softly against the ground. Thump! Thump! The crowd around them began to murmur again, but there was no longer anger or fear. They saw the soldier hugging the crying dog. They saw the dog tag Marcus clutched in his hand, held high like a sacred relic. The security commander approached, his gun holstered. He looked at Marcus, then at Rex, his eyes filled with confusion and respect. "Captain, what just happened?" Marcus stood up, his legs numb, but his heart light. He wiped his tears, reattaching the broken leash to Rex's collar, knowing now that no leash was needed to hold this dog. "Nothing, sir," Marcus said, his voice firm and clear across the windy plaza. "Just an old soldier completing an unfinished mission." He leaned down and whispered to Rex, "Come on, old friend. We have to go to the hospital. You need to be there when he wakes up. David would want you there." Rex stood up. This time, he didn't need a command. He walked beside Marcus, his head held high, following the fading sound of the ambulance siren. The shadows of a soldier and a dog stretched long across the Memorial Plaza pavement, etched into the history of this day, not by a glorious parade, but by a story of loyalty that transcended death. The ambulance hadn't yet moved when the rear door swung wide open. A young nurse poked her head out, waving Marcus over urgently. "Captain, he's awake. He's asking to see the dog." Marcus didn't hesitate. He patted Rex's flank. "Let's go." Both ran toward the vehicle. Rex, despite his age and the earlier impact causing a slight limp, managed to scramble onto the ambulance floor. Inside the compartment, thick with the smell of antiseptic, the homeless man lay breathing shallowly through an oxygen mask. The heart monitor beside him beeped, steadily but weakly. His eyes, which had been dull and vacant moments ago, now sparked with a strange light when he saw Rex's large, furry head appear. The old man tremblingly reached out his frail hand, poked with 4 needles. Rex approached, nudging his wet nose into the man's palm. He didn't lick playfully as usual. He rubbed his head into it firmly, deeply, closing his eyes, savoring the familiar warmth he thought he had lost forever. The man pulled down the oxygen mask, his lips moving. Marcus had to lean close to hear his voice, a whisper like wind through a broken pane. I walked from Kentucky." The old man gasped, each word broken by chest pain. 3,000 miles. I had to find him." He lightly rubbed the long scar on Rex's left ear, a scar from shrapnel on that fateful night in Afghanistan. "David, he told me." The old man's tears overflowed, streaming down his temples. "He said, 'You must live. Rex will bring you home.' I promised. Before dying, I had to thank him." The old man looked at Marcus, his eyes pleading. "I'm not a thief. I just kept the tag, so they could lead me back to him." Marcus felt a lump of stone lodged in his throat. He took the man's other hand. I know you're not a thief. You were their comrade. You are family." The man smiled, a distorted, painful but content smile. He patted Rex's head. "One last time. Thank you, old friend. Now, I can rest." The heart monitor suddenly emitted a long, monotonous tone. Beep. The man's hand went limp, sliding off Rex's head. "He's gone," the nurse whispered, lowering her head. Rex did not bark. He didn't panic. He simply placed his chin gently on the chest of the man who had just taken his last breath, letting out a long, profound sigh, a breath that released the burden of 8 long years. Marcus stepped out of the ambulance, his eyes red. He looked out at the vast plaza. The parade had completely halted. Thousands of soldiers, dozens of formations, all stood perfectly still, their eyes fixed on the ambulance. News had spread like wildfire. The story of David Miller, the homeless man, and Rex had reached the ear of every young soldier. The commanding general of the army, who had been standing on the highest podium, stepped down. He walked a long distance to where the ambulance was parked. He stood before Marcus and Rex. Without a word, he looked at the rusted dog tag Marcus held, then at the old dog sitting solemnly beside the wheel. The general drew his ceremonial sword from its scabbard. The steel glinted in the noon sun. "Attention, division!" His voice boomed through the loudspeakers, reverberating off the Chicago skyscrapers. "Present arms!" Thousands of heels clapped together, creating a rumbling sound like thunder. "Today, we do not just honor the fallen," the general stated clearly. "We honor a promise kept by a soldier who never knew defeat. No matter who his comrade was, no matter how long the time." He raised the sword high, pointing the tip toward Rex. "All troops, salute." Thousands of arms snapped up to the brim of their caps. Simultaneously, old soldiers with chests full of medals, young rookies, high-ranking officers, all directed their respectful gaze towards the old German shepherd. The civilian crowd on both sides of the street also fell silent. Many men removed their hats and held them to their hearts. Many women wiped their eyes with handkerchiefs. In that solemn moment, Rex suddenly stood up. He separated from Marcus's leg, taking one step forward. He stood alone in the vast emptiness of the plaza, facing an entire corps saluting him. He held his head high, puffing out his chest to receive the sunlight filtering through the leaves. The wind from Lake Michigan ruffled his salt and pepper coat. And then he opened his mouth. Woof, woof, woof. 3 barks. Not the bark of anger, not the bark of pain. They were 3 short, crisp, sharp, and proud barks. It was the code for mission complete. Marcus looked at Rex. For a split second, he swore the dog's eyes were not looking at the general, nor at the crowd. They were looking towards the deep blue sky above, where white clouds drifted lazily. There perhaps David Miller was waiting, with a gentle smile and open arms. He was saying, "Well done, partner. Time to come home." 3 months later, Arlington National Cemetery was steeped in the golden hues of autumn. The rows of white headstones stretched far into the horizon. Marcus pushed the wheelchair along the gravel path. Sitting in the chair was Rex. His hind legs had weakened significantly since that day. The vet said his joints were overloaded after a lifetime of campaigning. They stopped before a new grave. The stone marker had not yet gathered moss, but beside it was another, much older headstone. Sergeant David Miller. And beside it, Arthur, the survivor, friend of Sergeant Miller. The Army had agreed to a special exception, burying the homeless man right next to David. They were reunited in the earth, just as they had lain, side by side in the cold stone bunker that night. Marcus lifted Rex out of the wheelchair, placing him on the soft grass between the 2 graves. "We came to visit them, Rex," Marcus whispered, setting down a bouquet of white chrysanthemums. Rex lay there, his head resting on his front paws, his eyes half closed. The autumn wind rustled, carrying the scent of dry leaves and damp earth. He no longer had to strain to hear gunfire, no longer had to sniff out a familiar scent among a crowd of strangers. That scent was now right beside him, surrounding him, peaceful and eternal. Rex sighed softly, a breath of immense relief. His ears twitched as if hearing a distant call. He had fulfilled the final command. Now the old soldier could sleep peacefully, because he knew that no matter where he lay down, his soul would always belong here, beside the comrades he had spent his entire life loving and protecting.